The Varkari Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their doctrine was simple. If a species could not hunt, it was not worth fearing. Predation was their highest virtue, their measure of worth. Civilizations that farmed, built cities, and relied on machines rather than claws and cunning were, in their eyes, soft prey. When Earth was discovered, it was cataloged quickly. Oxygen-rich, resource-dense, densely populated, but heavily domesticated. Satellite scans revealed urban sprawl, roads, synthetic agriculture, and entertainment networks. Analysts scoffed at the humans. No record of telepathic abilities, no natural weapons, and no known record of space warfare victories. Their strength, the analysts claimed, was economic. Their military seemed bloated and tech-reliant, primitive by Dominion standards. Not predators. Varkari scouts sent back data on human behavior. Most lived in climate-controlled structures. They gathered food from stores, not the wild. They communicated through primitive digital text. They even had cultural hang-ups about violence. One analyst summarized the report with a sneer. They raise pets. They don't hunt. Leadership approved a limited incursion. Not a military campaign. No, this would be a capture-and-study mission. Elite hunter teams would be deployed to unguarded zones, forests, swamps, mountain ridges, places human governments largely ignored. Biological samples would be collected, resistance measured, and specimens returned for dissection and behavioral profiling. It was the kind of operation the warlords used to train initiates. A test of skill? Yes, but with low risk. The mission brief described Earth's biosphere as primitive. Dangerous creatures were few and localized. Climate and terrain presented mild challenges. Scans showed high carbon levels, warm temperatures, and ample biomass. To the Dominion, Earth was a nursery of weak life. The hunter scouts were eager. Varkari soldiers were bred for this. Agile, multi-limbed, with chitin-armored skin and eyes attuned to low light. Each team was deployed with personal cloaking units, plasma nets, and neural disruptors. The humans, they believed, would not even know they had landed. But something strange happened during initial entry. One team, deployed in a forested zone near the northern sector, reported sensor disruption. Trees interfered with their thermal scans. Sound dampeners failed intermittently. Local animal life was minimal, too quiet. No birds, no mammals, not even insects. The lead scout joked that perhaps the humans had sterilized the area. Then the perimeter alarm flared briefly, something moving at speed. The movement pattern didn't match any logged wildlife signatures. Still, no heat trace, no visible form. Just vibration in the ground and sudden, inexplicable absence. A lone Varkari broke protocol and separated to investigate. His last transmission was a burst of static, followed by a single word in their tongue, eyes. The team laughed at first. He was probably disoriented or joking. Then another vanished. This time, the other saw it. One moment he was upright, scanning the underbrush, and the next his silhouette flickered and dropped out of frame. No struggle. Just gone. Back at orbit, the commanding warlord flagged the anomaly. Local terrain may have been underestimated. He authorized release of short-range drone to recon the zone. The drone pinged back partial visuals. Empty clearings, signs of artificial traps, tripwires made of fiber, subtle camouflaging techniques that didn't show up under standard spectrum analysis. It was dismissed as environmental instability. Perhaps human legacy military units were performing exercises. Still, the Dominion adjusted tactics. A second team was sent in, heavier equipment, more sensors, and a mobile command unit for real-time tracking. They never made it to the landing point. Logs showed the drop pod's outer hull sliced open before touchdown. The emergency beacon activated, transmitting brief telemetry, shifts in wind pressure, sudden loss of magnetic alignment, auditory interference. The final log was an audio recording. Rhythmic breath sounds, too slow for Varkari, followed by a whisper in a language they didn't understand. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't even a warning, but it felt like one. For the first time, the Dominion paused. Earth was not resisting in the open. No ships, no armies, no declarations. But something in the forests moved with intent. Something that watched, waited, and struck only when it chose. No trace, no trophies, no signal. The warlords reviewed the data. Still, most saw it as a fluke. A rogue AI? A malfunction? Perhaps a human madman. Dangerous, yes, but isolated. A final decision was made. They would continue, but expand surveillance. The planet was to be categorized not as prey, but as a curiosity. No one asked why the forests had no birds. No one asked why their best scouts had stopped responding. And no one thought to consider that humans didn't stop hunting just because they built cities. The forest was quiet, unnaturally so. The canopy choked most of the light. Beneath it, moss muted every footfall. No animals called. No insects buzzed. The alien team moved cautiously, their movements precise, armor whispering against damp leaves. Each step was calculated, each breath measured, but the silence pressed in like a weight. Their sensors flickered again, brief surges of static, false positives. Something was interfering, but they couldn't triangulate it. The lead hunter signaled for a scan sweep. Nothing but vegetation, temperature anomalies, and false echoes. They moved on. 40 paces later, the last in the formation dropped. No noise, no flash, just gone. The others turned, weapons raised, but there was no target, no movement, only his locator beacon, blinking on the ground in a patch of disturbed moss. The squad tightened formation. The forest scout had been watching since they entered. He didn't speak, didn't announce himself. No dialogue, no dramatics. Just stillness and calculated motion. His gear was outdated by galactic standards. No energy weapons, no exo-armor. But everything he carried was custom. Suppressed, silent, deadly. The rifle was camouflaged, designed for one shot, one kill. The traps he'd laid weren't mass-produced. They were handcrafted from steel and wire, calibrated to cripple or confuse. The alien squad's training was superior, on paper. Their reflexes sharp, but they had never hunted something that hunted back without warning, without heat, without pride. They searched the trees. No sign. Thermal scans picked up nothing. Motion detectors registered the sway of branches. One muttered a warning. Another aimed into the brush. A second team member vanished. No scream, just silence. The forest scout moved with the terrain, used it like armor. The leaves cloaked him, the ground absorbed his footsteps. He was never still for long. Once spotted, he vanished again. He didn't stalk for the thrill. He didn't kill for dominance. He acted out of purpose, out of instinct, like countless generations before him. Not a soldier, not a hero, a guardian. The third kill was Messier. A wire snapped around an alien's throat, yanking him backward. He tried to scream, but the sound was muffled, gurgled, then stopped. The squad broke formation, panic blooming beneath their helmets. Their leader barked orders, but no one answered. Comms had gone silent. The forest swallowed every sound. One of them fired blindly into the trees, plasma bolts scorching bark and ferns. Nothing screamed. Nothing fell. Just steam, smoke, and more silence. They'd trained for close-quarters battle, for jungle resistance, but not for this. Death without a face. Fear without a form. The scout moved again. His breathing was slow, heart rate steady. He knew their reactions. They'd fall apart soon. He could smell the confusion in their movements, hear it in the way they stepped too loudly, too fast. He didn't need a rush. Patience was his edge. The forest was his home. It obeyed his rhythm. The fourth kill came from below. One alien stumbled into a pit. Not a deep one, just enough to twist his ankle and leave him exposed. He screamed, and that broke the silence. The scout let him scream. The noise would draw the others. Two came running. One was hit with a blunt force trap, crushed chest, dropped mid-sprint. The other turned to flee. He didn't get far. The last one activated the emergency beacon. He screamed into it in a tongue only his species understood, but his words were clear enough. The fear translated. His voice cracked. His helmet's internal translator tagged phrases. Invisible. Hunter. We're being hunted. Not prey. Predator. Back in orbit, Dominion Command received the signal. No visuals. No bodies. Just one beacon. Just static and fear. They attempted retrieval. The beacon vanished 10 minutes later. No trace remained. On the ground, the scout retrieved nothing. No trophies. No gear. No glory. He checked the perimeter again, then moved deeper into the trees. No celebration. No words. Just the forest, silent once more. He knew more would come. He didn't care. This wasn't war. It wasn't a mission. It was what he did, what he was trained for. To move unseen. To end threats before they became stories. The Dominion had come expecting farmers and engineers. They hadn't accounted for men like him. Shadows shaped by wilderness, perfected by generations of survival, honed into instinctual weapons. They had come to test the planet's resolve. Instead, they found a reason no one dared claim Earth's forests as their own. The scout didn't need a name. The forest gave him purpose. And now, it had given him prey. The lone survivor stumbled into the extraction zone, armor cracked, helmet missing, eyes wide with something the Dominion had no word for. Not just fear, reverence. He collapsed before the medics reached him, whispering fragments of his report. No coordinates, no enemies, just a presence. A force. He kept repeating the phrase, it waits. It watches. It hunts. Command didn't know whether to court-martial him or quarantine him. The footage from his suit was incomplete, blurred visuals, scrambled audio, and occasional glimpses of traps built with primitive elegance. They weren't high-tech, but they were effective and precise, the kind of precision that indicated deep, inherited skill. The decision was made to send in a retrieval force. Not scouts this time, soldiers. Heavy weapons, drones, thermal mapping. 50 strong. Accompanied by war beasts genetically bred to sniff out ambush predators. No chances this time. As they descended into the forest, they activated sonar mappers. Everything seemed clear. Movement patterns of birds and mammals were re-established, though oddly inconsistent. The terrain showed no signs of life-threatening anomalies. But 40 minutes in, the machines began to fail again. Drones veered off course. Mapping data desynced. Static returned. Echo patterns showed old, repeated pings, as if the forest was throwing their sensors back at them. Then the war beasts halted, muscles tight, nostrils flaring. But they didn't growl. They backed away. One refused to move forward, whining. Its handler struck it, but it would not budge. Seconds later, the handler was lifted from the ground, his harness torn with a clean, curved blade. No gunfire. Just a muted gasp and a fall. Panic threatened the formation. Orders were shouted. They held position. For 2 hours, nothing followed. No further attacks. The illusion of safety crept back. Until the mimicry began. At first, it was the sound of a Varkari voice calling for help. Same cadence, same frequency, coming from a direction where no team had gone. Then came footsteps, deliberate and too slow. Then the sound of metal scraping metal. But when investigated, no source could be found. Then shadows, darting just beyond the edges of visibility. Shapes that didn't register on sensors but pressed into the minds of the soldiers. The team's comms began to fragment. Each soldier began to report different visual inputs. One swore he saw a humanoid in the trees. Another claimed a face appeared behind his reflection in his visor. Another said nothing. Just dropped his weapon and walked into the dark. They tried to regroup, but cohesion had evaporated. They weren't being attacked. They were being dismantled piece by piece, not with firepower, but by unmaking their sense of safety. The Forest Scout had studied them, learned their limits, and now exploited every weakness, doubt, fear, confusion. A veteran warlord among them ordered an airstrike on the zone. The signal never reached orbit. Jammers, they assumed, but there were no known jamming signals active. It wasn't interference. It was surgical, selective. The forest itself had become the countermeasure. Several hours later, only 3 soldiers remained. They fired at nothing, screaming into dead calms. When the extraction finally reached them, they were crouched together under makeshift shelter, weapons discarded, staring at a crude message carved into the bark of a tree. You are not the only hunters. One of them had etched tally marks into his armor. each line matching the number of comrades lost. In the debriefing, the survivors couldn't describe the enemy. They had no visual confirmation, no measurable threat, just a presence that dismantled their force without engaging in direct combat. No bodies were recovered, no gear, just silence and the sense that they'd been allowed to leave. The Dominion's High Council convened. Never before had such a minor world yielded this kind of psychological destruction. Data analysts attempted to frame it as atmospheric interference, but command officers objected. This wasn't nature. It was intent, strategy. One survivor compared the experience to a child's story of the predator that waits in dreams. They laughed, then stopped laughing. Interrogations of captured human prisoners revealed no coordinated military in the area. No special forces deployments. One human, a biologist, reviewed the footage and simply said, "That's not a soldier. That's a forest scout." When asked to elaborate, he replied, "You went into the woods. You didn't ask who owned them." A new term began circulating through Dominion ranks, unofficially at first. Ghost of the Green. A myth, they said, to explain what couldn't be explained. An apex entity. A human anomaly. Command refused to acknowledge it formally, but ships stopped deploying near forest zones. Survey protocols were updated. Avoid deep canopy entries and withdraw at first contact loss. In the minds of the Valkyrie soldiers, the scout wasn't a man anymore. He was legend, a manifestation of the unknown. They came to Earth to hunt. But now, when they spoke of the planet, they used different words. The Dominion initiated silence protocols. All mentions of the failed operation were buried under classification. Officially, the Earth expedition was labeled incomplete due to environmental instability and sensor anomalies. Internally, fear festered. High Command ordered a data purge on all recovered footage and biometric readings. Any mention of the Forest Scout was stripped from the military network. But rumors don't die with files. Among the lower ranks, stories spread of trees that bled, of whispers in the wind, of footsteps heard but never seen. Field operatives began refusing forest assignments, citing sensor ghosts and localized madness. Some were reassigned. Others simply disappeared. No one questioned it out loud. Even warlords, once so eager to test their mettle, stopped volunteering for Earth excursions. Too much uncertainty. Too little gain. Attempts to re-engage with Earth's governments diplomatically failed. Every probe sent was returned hacked, its memory banks wiped clean. Stealth satellites deorbited themselves with no apparent cause. Energy signatures detected over Earth's forest zones didn't match human technology. They were too precise, too adaptive. The Dominion realized they weren't dealing with outdated soldiers. They were facing people who had adapted hunting into science. Back on Earth, the scout didn't change. He didn't seek fame or recognition. He remained in his terrain, rotating through zones, updating traps, refining methods. Every move was purposeful, every silence a test. He monitored satellites, tracked sound patterns, watched migration shifts in the local wildlife. He wasn't alone, not in the literal sense, but in his purpose, he stood apart. He wasn't serving a nation. He was serving a principle. Predators protect their ground. Somewhere in a black site Dominion think tank, analysts broke protocol and reclassified Earth not as a resource world, but as a predator world. That term had never been used before. It was reserved for outlier biospheres, systems where apex species didn't dominate by force alone, but through layered strategy, environmental synergy, and cultural ruthlessness. Earth's forests weren't just trees. They were weapons. The scout wasn't just a man. He was a product of a world that had learned how to resist extinction on instinct. The Dominion pulled back. Research teams were redirected. Reconnaissance fleets rerouted. Earth was put on passive surveillance status. No contact, no landings, no tests. It was too expensive, too dangerous. A planet where even an isolated human in a forest could dismantle an elite strike team without leaving evidence. Not a battlefield, a death trap. Over time, the legend grew. Among alien mercenaries, Earth became a cautionary tale. Not for its weapons, not for its politics, but for its forests. They whispered of silent hunters, of eyes in the trees, of the ground itself choosing sides. Smugglers refused to land anywhere not paved. Pilots refused jobs near the northern zones. Even scavengers avoided the green belts. And Earth never said a word. No declaration. No retaliation. Just silence and vigilance. The Dominion had measured worth by technological force, by urban growth, by energy output. They'd forgotten to measure instinct, patience, intimate understanding of terrain. They'd underestimated what it meant to live as both predator and protector. The scout moved through the woods with no audience. No orders, just an understanding, the kind that required no approval. The kind passed down through generations who had tracked, waited, and struck without mercy. He knew others would come. Different empires, different banners. But the forest would always be ready. Not because it hated intruders, but because it didn't forget. In time, Earth became known as the world that hunted back. The scout remained nameless, faceless. He didn't claim territory. He didn't record victories. He simply endured, survived, vanished when watched, struck only when necessary. And because of that, the Dominion chose the only form of surrender it could afford: silence. No invasion, no engagement, just space. Lots of it. The message was never spoken, but it was understood across sectors. If you go to Earth, stay on the concrete. Never enter the trees. Never assume you're alone. And above all, never think that just because humans don't show their claws, they've forgotten how to use them.